She had poured everything into that company. Late nights, weekends, holidays. She had mentored people who were now sitting at that very table, watching silently as she was discarded. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. Emily, her daughter. Helen's thumb hovered over the call button, but what would she even say? "Hi, sweetie. I lost my job today because they think I'm too old and out of touch." No. She couldn't handle the pity in Emily's voice. Instead, she stared at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. The fine lines around her eyes. The gray strands that had started appearing at her temples. The exhaustion. Who am I now? She had spent decades being Helen Porter, senior marketing director at Vanguard. Now? She was nobody. The weight of it pressed down on her chest. The job market was brutal. Helen spent weeks sending out resumes, weeks waiting, weeks being ignored. For the first time in her life, she was invisible. Recruiters barely responded. The ones who did politely rejected her, praising her experience but implying she was overqualified, a professional way of saying too old. She tried networking events, but the industry had changed. Rooms were filled with tech-savvy millennials in sleek sneakers, their conversations buzzing with startup jargon she barely understood. A 20-something hiring manager at an advertising agency smirked when she mentioned her decades of experience. "That's great," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "But we're really looking for someone who, understands the modern digital landscape." Helen clenched her jaw. "I led the transition from print to digital before you even graduated high school." The man laughed lightly, like she had just told a charming story about the past. Helen walked out before he could finish his next sentence. Then came the financial strain. Her severance package wasn't going to last forever. Mortgage, health insurance, car payments. She had never felt this level of panic before. At night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind running through numbers. What if I don't find something? What if I lose the house? What if I never work again? For the first time, Helen understood why so many people in their 50s never recovered from job loss. The world wasn't made for them anymore. Helen had stopped counting the rejection emails. She had memorized the generic lines. "Thank you for your application, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate." Every morning, she forced herself to wake up, refresh her inbox, and brace for disappointment. And every morning, it was the same. The polite dismissals, the silence. She had started avoiding mirrors. She couldn't bear to look at herself and see the doubt creeping in, the exhaustion, the quiet fear that maybe they were right. Maybe she was too old. Maybe her time was over. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. It started with a coffee shop. Helen had been sitting alone at a corner table, laptop open, scanning yet another job listing that required her to be digitally native. A term that, by now, felt like a slap in the face. She was about to close her laptop when a voice spoke beside her. "You look like someone who just lost a battle." Helen looked up. A woman, maybe a few years older than her, slid into the seat across from her, setting down a steaming cup of black coffee. She was polished but relaxed, her salt and pepper hair swept into a sharp bob, her blazer effortlessly stylish. Helen frowned. "Excuse me?" The woman smiled. "The way you're glaring at that screen, I recognize it." Helen hesitated. Then, something about the woman's confidence, the way she held herself, made her answer honestly. "I got fired. I've been job hunting for weeks, but apparently I'm too old to be useful." The woman's smile didn't fade. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Lillian Hart, founder and CEO, Hart Legacy Group. Helen blinked. The Lillian Hart? The woman who had built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm helping women over 50 restart their careers? Helen had read about her, admired her. "I was fired at 50, Lillian said casually, taking a sip of coffee. "Told I was outdated. That was 12 years ago." Helen leaned forward. "And now you run a company," Lillian smirked. "Not just a company, a movement." She tapped the business card. "We help women like us build something of their own. Instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's table, we make our own." Helen swallowed. Her fingers brushed the edge of the card. A movement? It sounded impossible. It sounded reckless. But as she looked at Lillian, a woman who had once stood exactly where she was now, it also sounded like hope. Helen sat in her car for a long time, staring at Lillian's business card. "We make our own table." The words echoed in her mind. She had spent weeks trying to fit into a system that had already decided she didn't belong. But what if she didn't need their approval? What if she built something of her own? Helen wasn't reckless. She had always played by the rules, worked hard, climbed the corporate ladder, waited for her turn. But now, at 55, she realized something terrifying. Her turn was never coming again, unless she took it for herself. That night, she pulled out her old leather-bound notebook, the one she had used to jot down marketing ideas over the years. Ideas that never saw the light of day because she was always too busy building someone else's dream. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing old notes, half-formed concepts, things she had once believed in. Then, one word caught her eye. Verve. A note from years ago, a brand concept she had thought of but never pitched. It was about women reinventing themselves. A brand that wasn't about youth or trends, but experience, wisdom, confidence. Helen exhaled, the idea sparking inside her. Maybe she could build something, not a corporate empire, not a desperate attempt to prove she was still relevant to people who had already dismissed her, but something that actually mattered. A business by women, for women. She didn't need another job. She needed a new purpose. And for the first time in months, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Excitement. Helen's excitement lasted until reality set in. Starting a business sounded bold, empowering. But where would she even begin? She had savings, but not enough to take reckless risks. She had experience, but no reputation as a business owner. And the biggest problem? Who would take her seriously? She didn't have the network of young entrepreneurs with their LinkedIn connections and startup incubators. She didn't have tech investors lining up to fund her vision. She had herself, and maybe Lillian. That would have to be enough. Helen spent days refining her idea, turning old notes into a real business plan. A marketing agency built around women over 50, their voices, their stories, their expertise. Verve wouldn't just sell products, it would sell experience, proving that women like her still had a place in the industry. But pitching the idea to potential clients was a different battle. She reached out to old colleagues, many didn't respond, others were polite but dismissive. That sounds interesting, but we're looking for something fresher. The industry is shifting, Helen. Are you sure you want to get into this now? We love the idea, but our brand targets a younger demographic. Every rejection felt like another blow. But she refused to break. Because one thing had changed. This time, she wasn't asking for permission. One evening, after yet another rejection, she found herself back at the same cafe where she had met Lillian. Lillian was waiting for her. And she wasn't alone. Around the table sat 6 other women. Some Helen recognized from the industry, others were strangers. All of them had something in common. They had been where she was. Some had been pushed out of companies they helped build. Others had been overlooked, sidelined, made to feel invisible. Now, they were here because of one simple truth. They weren't done yet. Lillian leaned forward, smiling. "You're not the only one, Helen. We're all tired of waiting for someone to give us a seat at the table. So, let's build our own." Helen and the women at the cafe didn't waste time. Within weeks, Verve had a name, a vision, and a mission statement. But what they didn't have yet were clients. That first contract would be everything. It would prove that experience mattered, that they mattered. Helen's first major pitch was to a well-known lifestyle brand struggling with its marketing strategy. She had one shot to convince them. She walked into the boardroom not as a desperate job seeker, but as the CEO of Verve, and across the table, she saw a familiar face. Ethan Grayson. The man who had called her not the right fit. The man who had dismissed her without a second thought. Ethan raised an eyebrow as she took her seat. "Helen, this is unexpected," she smiled. "I'm full of surprises these days." The irony was almost laughable. A month ago, she had walked into his office asking for a job. Now she was here to sell him a service. Ethan skimmed through the proposal. "I'll be honest, Helen, it's impressive. But let's be real." He leaned back, arms crossed. You're pitching experience, but the industry is evolving. We need people who understand modern consumers, the ones who are young, digital, and engaged. How does your team compete with agencies run by people half your age?" The room went quiet. Every woman from Verve looked at Helen. She could feel the old doubts creeping in. The fear, the insecurity, the voice in her head whispering, "Maybe he's right." But then she remembered the sleepless nights, the rejections, the way she had built everything from nothing. She wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to win. Helen leaned forward, locking eyes with Ethan. "Let me ask you something, Ethan. Who's making buying decisions in America today?" He hesitated. "Women," she continued. "Women over 50% control the majority of consumer spending. They're starting businesses, driving industries, and reshaping markets, yet companies like yours keep marketing to 20-year-olds who don't even have real money." A few executives exchanged glances. Helen pressed on. "You're chasing trends. We built the market. You're selling youthful innovation. We're selling trust. And that's why you need us." Silence. Then the CEO of the brand turned to Ethan. "She's got a point." Minutes later, Verve signed its first six-figure contract. Helen didn't look at Ethan as she left the room. She didn't need to. He had already seen what she was capable of. 1 year later, the offices of Verve were bustling with energy. What started as a desperate idea in a cafe had become a thriving agency, proving that experience wasn't obsolete, it was invaluable. Helen stood by the window, watching her team in action. Lillian was leading a strategy meeting. Camille was finalizing a new brand campaign. Dozens of women, once discarded by the industry, were now redefining it. She thought back to the day she had been fired, how that moment, so painful, so humiliating, had led her here. A door had closed, but she had built a new one. A knock on the glass door pulled her from her thoughts. Emily, her daughter, walked in with a smile. "You look different, Mom," she said. Helen laughed. "Older? Stronger." Emily handed her a small envelope. Helen opened it and froze. It was an invitation, the Women in Business Awards. She had been nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year. For a moment, she just held it, overwhelmed. Then she looked up. "Emily, do you remember what you said when I lost my job?" Emily hesitated. Then she nodded. "I said, maybe it was time to let go." Helen exhaled. "I think you were right, but I wasn't letting go of the past. I was letting go of who I thought I had to be." Her daughter reached for her hand. "And look at what you built instead." Helen smiled. She wasn't just a woman who had been fired at 55. She was the founder of something bigger. A business, a movement, a reminder that experience is power. And she was just getting started. Helen's story isn't just about revenge. It's about proving that age is not a weakness, but a superpower. Women over 50 have wisdom, resilience, and skills that no company can replace with younger hires. Do you think Helen was right to fight back? Comment 2. If you stand with Helen. Comment 7. If you think she should have moved on, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.